Wonderful. So actually, this is the first time I talked to you. I'm actually super excited and nervous at the same time because I finally get the chance to ask you all the questions of all your knowledge of doing, no code and pro code. And maybe we can get some knowledge out there or some wisdom out of you that we never heard before. Maybe, we never know. So I'm
Yeah, sure.
excited for this.
Yeah, it's gonna
And
be fun.
maybe why don't we just start? And, I mean,
Mhm.
I think most of you that are using Xano as the backend know you because, you have I mean, you have the Xano sign in your background. So, you're the Xano expert. But when I joined State Change, I just thought Ray's going to help me with Xano. I didn't know that he was an expert at Wiz too, at JavaScript and front end. I never knew that. So, maybe you tell us a little bit about your profession. What do you do? And then maybe also, what are the things that you do that we don't know of yet?
Yeah, sure. So, my training from back when was as a data scientist when I was in school. We didn't call it that back then. There wasn't such thing as data science, but I came into the political science department. I studied with some people who are now luminaries in the area of data visualization, like Ed Tufte, and sort of cobbled together a bit of a major in these disciplines. Worked in management consulting for a while, then hung out my own shingle, built a series of companies, including a couple of software companies that have done relatively well. Sort of learned that a lot of this is about, teaching and bringing up, other technologists. And then really in 2021 started getting more into this no-code business because my approach to technology and to software has always been, what's the tool that lets me accomplish this fastest, right? I'm not sort of a coder looking at it from pure science level. I'm trying to ask, okay, how do I get the job done, whether it's a data representation or analysis or, trying to build automatic agents or whatever it is. And this idea of no code to my mind was just this is just tools, right? Like I've sort of seen this sort of thing come up as early as in like the 1990s. It's like how can you apply more tools in order to do all this stuff faster? And so, I find there's a whole now movement of people who are trying to do more of this building, who are experts in their various business domains, right? And they're trying to make interesting projects happen. I learned about Xano and became very impressed with Prakash Chandran and Sean Montgomery and the team over there, and have been following along and have been a pretty active member of their community since I think 21. And I think now I'm the number one contributor outside of Xano staff themselves.
Right.
Like 1,500 contributions or something on that community. And then also discover that there are people working also on the front end, right? And I'm able to bring my expertise, where I've done React development and React Native development for well over a decade, and that hey, there are people who I can apply some of that knowledge and expertise to these newer no-code platforms. And actually, I'm discovering that what's old is new again. Like some of the older
Yes.
techniques, like jQuery, which I remember meeting John Resig back in 2006 and talking about like the early 1.0 versions of jQuery. And now, now it's sort of hot again because it's a way it composes into these no-code systems, especially like Webflow. And then, getting to meet people who are building like really cool tooling that allows us to build more stuff faster. And that's just been an exciting place to be. So now I'm running State Change, which is a coaching practice and a community of practice for people who are trying to build interesting projects. And I probably would have said, that this is all about low code, no code, but it's really about people who have something they want to bring into the world. And what's the easiest way to do that, right? And sometimes that's about using no code tools. Sometimes that's about bringing, AI driven development to the party. Sometimes it's just about like knowing some fundamentals about how to bring a little bit of jQuery to the party. And but whatever it is that's sticking them, like whatever that hardest 5% is, that's where I found most interesting puzzles to be, and that's where I focus my attention.
That is amazing. Yes. I mean, I have to say, I call it Ray query because before I asked you about how to do those things in Wiz, I was like, my issue was I need to click on this element and I want to change the color. But I don't want to use a variable to do that, because, Wiz is very limited when it comes to element-driven applications. And when I asked you how to do that, you said, let's just use jQuery. I was like, hold on, hold on. I'm not writing JavaScript. And you kind of like pushed me into there. And the moment I got from you pushed into there, I don't want to look back, right? So I think sometimes you need a little kick in the butt. I hope this will not get flagged by YouTube, but sometimes what I found with state changes, you get that little kick of a butt very gradually, of course, from Ray to say, let's write some jQuery. And you're like, ooh. But then, you help on every step of the way, which I found is very, very amazing. And what I do with my YouTube channel and in the Wix community, I try to do the same thing. And I always say, you are my inspiration in whatever I do for Wist. I just do it on the front end right now.
That's very kind of you to say, Yassine. And certainly like the YouTube channel you're doing is really impressive and helping a lot of people. So hopefully we can be helpful here today.
Yes, that would be great. So if you are ready, let's get right into the exciting stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So now when we talk about Xano, um, any specific reason why you like to use Xano instead of, for example, things like Supabase or Firebase, right? Especially in the Wiz community, I think people are like, okay, Xano, they're $99 a month. Supabase is 24, for example, or I don't know
Mhm.
if I'm correct with that anymore. Or Firebase, even you can start for free. And it has a very generous free tier as every Google product. So why Xano? Like, why do we even need that?
Yeah, so Xano sort of has three things going for it that I think are really neat. The first is they are very much about being no code first, while at the same time being very uh, powerful, right? Which I guess what brings in the second thing. But like being very no code first, like, they want to make it so you can accomplish just about everything you'd want to accomplish without having to dive down and start to write code that'd be hard for somebody else to read. And that is that's something that most of these other tools don't do. I mean, one of the things that impresses me about some of the alternatives, like the ones you described, or looking at like FastGen or BuildShip, is that they will bring some code to the party, some like intelligently used code. They sort of have a different theory of how to go about that. Which can unlock a lot of power. You use some AI, you're able to solve the problem a different way. But I find that in terms of like being able to do it through no code, Xano does it in a really, world-class way. And that can go pretty fast. And that sort of brings me to the second part, which is Xano thinks in terms of being computationally complete. So, like, if you were to look at some of these other tools, they took a while to come up with the kinds of branching and flow control that allow us one to create forgive the technical term, directed acyclic graph, which is the generalized way you might articulate a set of operations that you can do inside a function, right? Like for an API request or what have you. And their focus on being powerful with that stuff means that as a developer, you look at it and say, wait, I've got the tools, they're just being articulated in a somewhat more candy colored way. As opposed to you look at some of these others, like, wait, you can't do as much. They put more rails on what's accomplishable. And so you get a lot of power out of it while staying with no code. Neither of those, though, really explain the price point of Xano. And the price point of Xano has a lot more to do with the fact that Xano is instance-based as opposed to being serverless. And this has less to do with like the no-code part of the experience, but it's very important to the idea of infrastructure. So these other systems that I described, in fact, all of them aside from Xano, are what are called serverless, right? So what that means is you go in and they if you are asked to do something, it gives you a little bit of resource to do it. And that means it doesn't cost them a lot if you're not using a lot. But it also means you're on a meter. And if you use more, they will charge you more and they will charge you more. That's really the way Firebase makes its money. Is like as you go up with the amount you use, hey, now you're beyond our free tier and you're paying more. And whenever you're looking at like the major cloud vendors like AWS or Google Cloud
You get that
Platform or
surprise
Azure,
invoices.
well, you can get surprised, but basically it's you pay for what you use. And that can be that seems pretty cool when you're at the low end. And then when you're at the high end, you're looking at how did this bill come about? So Xano takes a different approach. Xano takes a little bit of a more old school approach, which if you were like, looking at what technology was like 25 years ago and you sort of buy yourself a rack and you go slot it in, you have your own computer, it provides you with your own compute by basically providing you with a virtual machine, right? And that means you have your whole virtual machine that's being allocated to you. Now, the difference in like the launch or scale plans, whatever, is like how hefty is that machine? Like they give you bigger machines as you go up. But because that machine is all yours, right, you can use it as much as you want. I've helped people save thousands of dollars compared to like using, I don't know, like Zapier, right? Where they had a whole bunch of Zaps going and they were switched over to do it on Xano instead. And because Xano is fixed price, right, run as many actions as you want as long as the machine can handle it. And it was a way to make a huge savings. So so Xano has that sort of step function, right, to its cost because you buy the whole machine and you get to use as much of it as you want. And actually I like that model because it makes the usage more predictable and encourages you to sort of come up with more creative ways to use the resource because it's not like you're going to be paying for it on the margin. So I find that sort of approach of Xano as software running in a virtual machine to be something I find a bit comforting and kind of like as a structure. But depending on the nature of your business, you might want to go a different way. But like so part of it is about the no code part. That's the first two parts and the no code and the power going with it, and the other is the deployment mechanism being instance based versus being serverless.
That is amazing. So I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it wasn't a virtual machine. I didn't know what really a virtual machine was until you just explained that. That is great. Uh, but this, so basically with Xano, you're paying a little bit more to then later on don't have a headache about how did this invoice come together because you have your own allocated resources, meaning, there are no spikes when other people are, starting to use that server all the time. You don't have any downsides from that because you don't share that with other people. You reserve your spot. And this is where the value comes. And this is why a lot of big companies and enterprises use Xano. So Xano is not really like a database as a service, kind of like it is, but it is virtual machine as a service with a nice tool to manage that virtual machine visually.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. It's just it is VM, and that the no code part is this control plane for deciding what that virtual machine is going to do. And when you look at the way people use it at the enterprise level, they don't use the same hosted stuff. They're not paying for launch or scale or whatever. They're just running it on their own hardware, and that's because Xano isn't, this orchestration system that's working within like Amazon Web Services or something. It's something that fits inside a machine. So if a enterprise has like big hefty machines or a bunch of them, they can just slot probably Docker containers into those machines, and now they've got a whole bunch of Xano instances running that's sort of on their own
And
iron,
they
and
can
that's sort of
still
cool because
use the
it's
Xano
software, not
dashboard.
service.
They can still use the Xano dashboard, right?
Well, actually, yeah, they can use their own private version of the Xano dashboard because the dashboard itself, whenever you're going into it, is sitting inside your instance. It's always
Oh,
private.
that's why when I changed the
It's the
endpoint
URL, yeah.
URL, oh, that is cool. So Xano is basically I'm buying like a real computer basically, and I'll have my no code way of interacting with that server.
Right. I mean,
Cool.
I don't. I'm not totally transparent with me exactly where the price points are, but like it's something along the lines of like if you buy a launch plan, it's gonna be like that, which would otherwise been like a $12 a month server if you were just buying the base virtual machine from GCP,
Right.
is you're paying like $100 a month for it for getting this additional control plane sitting on top of it.
Which is what makes it way easier. Now,
Yeah.
that is super cool. Thank you so much for elaborating that. I think this also now, justifies also for a lot of people why Xano is $99 a month because, they have a higher cost with you.
Right. I think the hosting, I think, is what explains a lot more of the price point, that deployment model. But I find the tooling to be quite good too. That said, I'm also a fan of what Harini is doing over BuildShip, of what Mike and Costa are doing over at FastGen, what Stuart's doing at Common&Co. There are other good tools out there, and we often encourage at State Change have people have a shopper's mindset. Look around what the right tool is for you, but I run state change on Xano. I find it to be a pretty good tool to use.
Perfect. That's great. You trust so much in Xano that you run your own thing all on there. That's the best advertising Xano can have right now. That is perfect. So now we want to go into security here, how to make your endpoints more secure, because I think that is a very common thing. But before I want to start about that, I think maybe some people have the misconception when they use WeWeb or Wized, and they have features like secrets or something like this that essentially let you run requests on their little HTTPS call infrastructure that will just wrap your front end calls on their backend, which imposes, some security issues because people can just call that endpoint and then still get your data back. They just don't have your API key, but they can still use your API key through that, which is just like half of the fix for that. What would you recommend? Like, what are the pros and cons of using something like secrets versus, environment variables in Xano, and maybe adding more safeguarding like auth tokens in Xano for that requests versus, just running them with those providers that are not specialized on backends?
So if you get a key from OpenAI, right? Whenever you make a request to OpenAI with that key, they will say, yeah, sure, here's your answer, and they will charge your account. You do not want that key to go into the hands of anybody, right, other than yourself. And what a mistake people sometimes start with is thinking they should put that into their front end, right, into their Webflow app, into their WeWeb or whatever. And that's a horrific thing to have happen, because anything that you put into your front end is going to be sitting inside the browser of the user, right? And that browser doesn't live on the server. The browser lives on your own machine. And they can go open up DevTools or whatever, and they can go scour it, and people do all the time, and be able to pull those things out. You also never want to leave your GitHub repository, but I don't think that's really the audience we're talking to today.
Yeah, we don't have a GitHub audience.
Yeah. So but you don't want to have it be in your front end. That's reasonable. That's where the secret stuff comes in, right? So the idea behind secret stuff is that you have a server layer, right? And WeWeb offers this as a service, and I think Wiz offers this as a service, and basically the front end players, most of them offer this. And the idea is that you can sort of wrap the request in, like, they have a little serverless function that will then go make that request on your behalf, and they will introduce a bit of security on this. And the good ones will introduce something called cross-site resource forgery protection, which makes it basically more challenging for somebody who shouldn't make a request into there to make a request into there. But it's of limited use, right? Basically, what you were describing is basically the case, which is that sure, you're not handing out your OpenAI key, but people will be able to call up that endpoint to go do whatever it's supposed to do. Right. And the only question is going to be how much work they need to make that happen.
Yes.
Now, the reason you'd want to use a system like that is if you have a site that doesn't involve any login, you want to sort of have it be open to everybody, but you're looking to keep some control and not just hand out your keys. Like, you want to have a free site where people can do OpenAI calls, which basically means you're spending money and your customer isn't. This is an okay way to get started with development, but is a tough way to make a living when you are not making money and they are, spending it. But there's some folks who want to do that. And that's the reason you use a secret-based service. Now, I find that the most common application of secret-based services is going to be when people just want to get going, right, with one of these APIs. And so for development, it can be okay. And there's certain circumstances, very limited, where you want to have that kind of thing for your backend as well, for your production side, I mean. But often when we're going to have something that costs us on the margin, you want to have some relationship with the customer before you're allowing too much of that stuff to happen. And that becomes where you probably want to have a bit of an authentication side to your backend to say, I got to know who you are before I start making requests on your behalf. But before we get too far into that, I just want to make sort of describe a couple things you can do to protect yourself before you get to the authentication part. So one is to be looking for that cross-site resource forgery, CSRF. A CSRF token structure is something you'd be looking for in your vendor for providing those kinds of secrets or that kind of gateway. If they're not providing that, that means people can make as many calls as they want, kind of without trouble. If they do provide that, it provides a bit of friction and puts you in a better position, although not a perfect one. A second thing you're going to look for is you want to be able to keep an eye on how much your token's being used. And just being able to measure, hey, my OpenAI token's being used more than like $100 this month. This is going to be a problem. And so putting throttles on the API key can be helpful, but certainly monitoring becomes important if you're going to have like open access to that kind of thing. And a third thing you might really care about is going to be IP limitation, which is not a perfect way of protecting, but actually gets you pretty far. Which is say that you want to make sure that that a given API isn't able to make more than X requests per minute or what have you. If you lack I mean, one of those tools can probably get you a little bit of the way. Two of those tools is better. All three is best. If you're not going to have actual authentication. But that'd be something I would look for, right?
Right.
But as you're having those things, because you do not want, money to sort of, go completely out of hand. Like earlier, we were talking about the serverless-based backends. So one way to really throttle that down is to be having some sort of login. And you'll find that a lot of like AI-based services in particular have that because the AI-based services are making use of, well, AI backends that are not cheap. And they're looking to make sure that you just don't sort of run off. And so like by knowing who you are and having level of authentication, which identifies you, is going to reduce the amount of abuse that you get by quite a bit. So a good practice is like you might allow a little bit of access on the free, but then you want to say, hey, now sign up. And then you're allowed to do a little bit more. And then just please pay me. And then you're allowed to do even more. And you're going to find that like a lot of services sort of have that cycle, right? A little bit you can do, not very, very limited in terms of the without sign in, then some amount with sign in, and then some amount where you've actually paid, all of which sort of keep your interests aligned
And
with
then you
the
can use something like local storage to give them a token, and then you track that even down
right,
on your
right.
back end and say, this IP address is getting critical. They already used $5 of our tokens. Uh, let's just don't have them call anymore. And
And have that token be the thing that you're really going to limit on because a token is a much stronger relationship with an individual than IP addresses. IP addresses can be faked. Tokens are very
yes,
hard to fake because
yes,
and we can talk about like different kinds of tokens, but if you are decently managing them on the back end or using a back end that decently manages it on your behalf, you get a lot of safety out of that compared to the kinds of sort of open techniques, the three things I've talked about before.
and I think when people move from things like developing with MemberStack and Zapier or Make.com, and they call Make to call Zapier and call Zapier to call Make to avoid the 30-second timeouts and all of that they have. People are just jumping in when they go into front-end development and they think they're going to build everything on the front end. So they use Airtable as their database, and they're going to authenticate the user. And then they do all the calls for that authenticated user on the front end using things like secrets, and then they have exposed the webhooks to their endpoints and they can be called from everywhere basically for their flows. Now, what would you give to an advice for somebody who would find themselves in such a position? I'm just off the hook now with Zapier. I'm looking into things like Waste or WeWeb and so on, and I want to do it right, but I don't know how. Like, how would that person get started? And then after that, maybe we go into maybe more of the security part of that.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit like what's your relationship with your customer? And where these backends become most useful as backends, like these tools can be used for things other than just being a backend to a front end. They're often very good at like data pipelines, robots, what have you. But let's leave those use cases aside. Just talk about them as backends for a front end developer. And I think these tools become most useful, like the Supabases, the Xanos, whatever of the world, when you're going to have a relationship with the customer, right? And that's going to be where like you have some sort of authentication. That's usually the first gateway drug. We're sort of stitching things together. We don't really care about who the user is yet because we're trying to just make sort of a cool service happen. And that's great from a developmental point of view. And lots of people start there. But I think the big reason a lot of people will shift saying, hey, what do I need to have on the back end that isn't just something simpler like what you're describing, like, stitching together workflows of, unauthenticated workflows like in Zaps or Makes, or using a simpler database system like Airtable, is going to be, wait, we need people to be able to log in, right? And when you say I want to log in, that I think is a good signal for it's time to be bringing some of these services to the party. And a good reason to have them log in is because you're concerned either about privacy or you're concerned about probably cost management, right? Because you're providing a service that is not totally free. And I
Yes.
think a lot of people were building things a few years ago that like were completely free, basically, because there was no real cost to the back end of it. But with the explosion of AI services, right,
Yes.
and the way that sort of is creating more cost, right, to be managing what you're going to be doing on the back end, and that becomes a really good reason to have more things that are going to have authentication to it. So I think authentication is like the first story of why you would
And
start to bring more complicated
also
things.
maybe content moderation, because I made a video about how to build an AI photo generator.
Yeah.
And I was looking and I made it so and I told them, of course, but I looked at my Xano database. I made it every time that photo was generated, it sent me a copy to my backend. I was looking through the photos and I was like, no, we can't have people generate that kind of photos. Um, so
Right. Well, authentication is a solution to the problem of content
yes,
moderation because it says
yes,
it basically says you can't speak anonymously, right?
yes,
You speak, but you got to put your name against it, and then we do that through logins, and that
yes,
helps with it. Facebook, somewhat famously, I mean, it went from having allowing people just have handles to requiring real names, really to sort of clamp down on like abuse and what have you, and that's
yes,
sort of the same kind of story, but it's an authentication story, it's an identification story that has a real salutary effect, on
right.
content abuse.
Because then you can also track back who is violating your terms and services, and you can, restrict their account or flag their IP address or whatever. Add a
Right,
token on their computer, like in local storage, that whenever they log in, checks if that token has been set, and then you're just going to not let them in, and maybe combine that with more like cross-device tracking mechanisms and all of that exist, right?
right.
But that is something I was like, when we talk about authentication, we only talk about maybe like reducing costs, but it's also content moderation,
Yep.
especially in the age of AI. Like when you build a tool that makes songs like Suno or something, you don't want to have anybody, trying to reassemble any famous artists. And if they try to, you probably don't want them on your platform. And authentication using a proper backend like Xano can help you do that and track back on, potential abuse that could get you in legal trouble.
Yeah, I mean, trolls live in the dark. People don't usually put their name to abusive tactics, and so things that have that sort of require a login first tend to have a lot less abuse and less that you have to moderate. That doesn't go to zero, but it
Yes.
goes down by a lot, and that becomes a good reason to, want to basically just put a bouncer at the door.
Perfect. So when somebody wants to start, like, would you recommend them to even to work with Airtable if they try to build like a booking application or something like that?
Well, it depends on who's this going to be used for. Like
Right.
I find there are, sort of three ways I see no code kind of get used. One is personal automations. Like I find like if anyone's looking to get started with no code, I'll say immediately, just go use Zapier. Right. In Zapier, you can in 5 minutes, you can go from zero to hero and they will have a customer for life. I love it as a business, right? Because their retention is fabulous. But it's also really, really valuable because you find, hey, you can have something that's like can catch certain kinds of emails and like send you a notification when like these really important ones come in the door, and your life is better, right? Or reminders when meetings are going to come up and get them as a text or whatever. Like there are little things you can do, and the little things are going to depend on who the person is. But like that, I find that makes such a big difference. The second major use I see is going to be an internal tooling, and that's going to be like for personal productivity or productivity within your company or for your team. And that's a really good use for these tools. And at that point, you don't really need like a big authentication system. You use something like an Airtable. You probably lock it down sort of saying only other Airtable users, come into your base or doing whatever you're going to do. But that's a pretty good place to be, and that's where actually a lot of the money in no code is today, particularly on the corporate side. And then you have the third kind, which is apps are going to be used by people who are on the outside, right? And and it's a little bit like saying there's you built out a new kitchen, right? And the door to the kitchen is the door to the rest of the house, and that door doesn't need to be that secure, right? Because people have to come into the house first in order to be able to get to your kitchen anyway. So you
Yes.
care about the niceness of the kitchen, but you don't really care about the security of the door.
Yes.
On the other hand, you put another door on the house and you care a great deal about it, right? The
Yes.
security of that door really matters. And that's going to be where you have like externally facing sites or services or what have you. And that's probably where you're going to need to think about authentication as a first class consideration. And the way the pricing works on these other tools, like Retool or Airtable or Microsoft Power Platform or what have you, those are all designed for internal use, right? And so they think their pricing is perfectly acceptable if it's based on employees, but it makes absolutely no sense if you're going to be having a whole bunch of customers who might be paying you less or have a free tier or whatever else. And that becomes why you want to use one of these other tools that are more designed to be externally facing. And that's going to be what Xano does really well, and Xano and its competitors, and that include FastGen, BuildShip, Conoco, backend lists. They're all designed with this external and relatively secure authentication in mind. Put a different way, they know how to put a lock on a door.
Wonderful. So if you're building a SaaS, probably not on Airtable.
Well, probably not, no, because you need something to be managing your authentication and to be gating those requests. That's not to say you can't be using Airtable somewhere in the composition, but I wouldn't be using it as the gateway system between
And you're
your front
limited to
end.
100,000 records. So this is
Well, yeah,
why,
an Airtable, because of its sort of spreadsheet roots, is
yes.
limited because it has increasing costs as it grows, as compared with Supabase or Xano, which use what are called relational database structures, which scale excellently. You can have millions upon millions upon millions of records, and it won't break a sweat. There are things you can do to make it break a sweat, but those simple requests will be super simple for them. Whereas that same simple request from Airtable is causing it to really quite gronk if it has 80,000 records in it. And that becomes the reason why we say that those others are scalable systems. But of course, the same thing that makes them scalable makes them a little bit harder to work with. So that's the reason why if you're doing something internal that doesn't require that scale, these other more internally or friendlier tools like Airtable, Rowie, whatever, let you go faster.
Wonderful. So let's say now I listened to this. I decided not to build it on Airtable and I want to go with Xano. How would I start? Like, how do I start to have it secure from day one? Like, because I can build something, Swagger will be turned on. Oh no, now they disable it by default. But then, my endpoints are exposed by, the Wized config file and people can get them. And, how do I
Yeah.
protect my database? How do I protect my endpoints? How do I not have, sometimes I had this with my first Wiz project where, all of a sudden my database got spammed full with like, buy this discount and then with things to buy random stuff. And I was like, where does this come from? Then I just figured out, oh, they did it through Swagger.
Yeah. So I think when people are developing, it can be fine to have unauthenticated endpoints. I would, like you just suggested, turn off Swagger right away unless you're using it. I suspect most people who are listening to this have no idea what Swagger is. That's fine. You go search for it, you say turn it off. Swagger is a way of documenting endpoints, and is great if you're offering an API as a service, right? And third-party people are going to be accessing your API using as machine to machine, right? Like building a Zap
If you
for
build
it.
the next open AI, you gotta use probably Swagger.
Right. Use Swagger, and then Swagger documentation can be imported into other documentation systems like README or what have you. That will just make fabulous stuff happen with it. But most people aren't building that kind of thing, right? If we're talking about building something that's going to have like a front end of Wized or WeWeb or what have you, the likelihood that you really want that is small. So first thing you do is you turn that off. Second thing you do is, we're talking about things that are going to have a relationship with the user, which means you got to know who the user is. And I often see people like they start to create endpoints in Xano and they start to be saying, I'm going to take as an input to this endpoint the user ID. No, no, no. What you want to do is have early in your the process that your user experiences a sign-in page. Probably sign up, but also sign in. Xano has some pre-built endpoints that you can that work relatively well for like a simple way of setting up a sign up and setting up a sign in. And a lot of these front end systems like WeWeb and Wiz and others, they've got templates, right, to make it easy to be interacting with those. And that would be just where I would start. I wouldn't try to get too fancy with that username password. It does the job most of the time. And for those situations where it doesn't do the job, great, you got a special situation. Let's sort of dial into the special situation. But like the general get started, I would start with simple. The by doing that, it like will link one of your tables, a user table, right? To to an authentication token. And so the idea is that your server side, right, in this case, Xano, is going to create a token, is going to cryptographically sign it with a couple pieces of information. The first is this user is Yassine, right? Well, you probably have a number, right? User number 3. And it will also have, and this is how long the token is good for. So the idea is the token's good for maybe an hour or maybe for 24 hours or what have you. And you can keep on sending up that token in the header of your request. The header is kind of like writing on the outside of an envelope. And then like the actual request is like what the letter goes on the inside. And because it has that secret code, which is a token, that token, which is meaningless to you, but means something to the server and is not replicable by anyone else because of that cryptographic signing, right? It's like they have their own secret seal that is put over it. And that way they know, one, that it came from them, right? Came from Xano. Two, that it's about Yassine. And three, that its expiration date is sometime in the future. And based on those three pieces of information, they're like, yeah, sure, come on in. What do you need? And then that's how you have an authenticated request. That's not something you want to handle yourself. And that's the reason why, Xano and these other systems provide you with a built-in way of managing those tokens. And then what happens when you sign in is you send it your username password or something else, you make something fancier, and it sends you back this token. And then this token gets stored in your web browser, and you're referring to local storage. Your web browser renders stuff directly on the screen, and when you press refresh on your page, kind of forgets everything, right? It becomes like Guy Pearce and Memento. But you can write it down. You can have what's called persistent storage, and that's going to be something that's able to load up even between refreshes of your web browser or closing up your web browser and bringing it back again. This only works, by the way, inside a single web browser, right? It's not shared between like Chrome and Firefox. But there are a few different technologies, one of which is called local storage, another one is called session storage, another one is called IndexedDB. These are all examples of what are called persistent storage, and there's also cookies, that if you save it there, then you can retrieve from call to call to call, and then that token is good until, wait, now it's aged out, and we're not going to allow it anymore. And then like so that way, even if somebody else gets their hands on your token, it's dead in an hour. It doesn't do them any good. So if they're spending lots and lots of time, right, to try to decrypt your web traffic, like, oh wait, we got Yassine's token, and he made it 45 minutes, it's not going to help them that much.
This is what I actually looked at, what I saw on GitHub going on. There was one tool, one AI tool that was like going viral, and it didn't have an API. So what people did, they built like little serverless functions
Yeah.
signing in on like Playwright or something every hour, inspecting elements using Playwright. Playwright, by the way, for the people that don't know, it is like a virtual browser automation tool that's uh, also something that is also going like viral right now because of an AI product that uses it. But it's pretty cool. So they just inspected the elements, got that token every hour, and then just used that to make API calls on their backend to get like an unofficial API for, they could do this with Midjourney and Discord automations and all of that, which is pretty neat.
It is neat, it is a little scary. And like when you're thinking about like how to protect yourself, going down the line for like keeping bots from being able to sign up with your stuff,
Yeah.
there is technology that will protect that as well. It's more front-endy. There's something called reCAPTCHA by Google, which if you've ever had that pop-up of like pick the fire hydrants and that kind of thing,
By
that
the way,
that
it's broken on Xano, just so that you know. If you click on the side of your screen, it closes the reCAPTCHA and marks it as successful.
oh, that's really encouraging. You know, these technologies are beat up, right? But it's a little bit like the bear joke. You know the bear joke?
No.
Okay, there are these two guys, right, going jogging in the woods, and then they come across a bear, right? And this bear rears up and sort of, points its claws towards him and is growling and the first guy bends down and starts tying his shoelaces. And his friend says, "You fool! There's no way we're gonna outrun this bear. He says, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you." A reasonable principle for a lot of security is just how you can not be the weakest link in the chain, right? If there are other sites out there that are more insecure than yours, that probably puts you in pretty good stead. So there's a lot of stuff like how can you be absolutely secure? And you can always be a bit more secure. It's always going to be about cost benefit relationship. But the question you might reasonably ask is relative to your domain, how secure are you? Because if you're more secure, if you have better lock on your door than your neighbors do, then you're a lot less likely to get robbed because the robbers can have easier time somewhere else. And
And
that is, I mean, not a perfect way of going about things, but it's often a pretty good, rule of thumb for figuring out what, where that line should be and right, and we're making investments.
and then you can use things like reCAPTCHA to, make those things more secure.
Make it more secure, right? Put a
What
deadbolt.
actually happened, also a funny story. There was this thing called Rabbit R1, and it was like this little AI device that could, use like use not Puppeteer, Playwright to, do things with some pre-written scripts. And, it worked. It could order your DoorDash, but the moment DoorDash figured out why are we getting millions of AI requests here on our site, like on a virtual browser, what's going on? We have bots. Uh, they just added reCAPTCHA on everything. And then now when you want to call your Uber or get some food from Uber Eats with
Yeah.
the Rabbit R1, it is saying the DoorDash Rabbit is under maintenance because it always gets stuck with the reCAPTCHA. So it's also a cool way to prevent that. Use reCAPTCHA. And don't make it a bit better than Xano right now so they cannot click on the site to close it.
Right. The you want, of course, you always want to test this stuff, and like reCAPTCHA has both the server side and the client side part. And what happens basically is you sort of do the little experiment, and then it sends a little code back to the server side as well as to the front side, and then those two things combine to say, all right, this is all valid code, and everybody's happy now. It's a bit more work, right, to implement, but it falls in the category of like adding that deadbolt to your door in addition to your latch. It's not going to be completely perfect relative to keeping people out of your house, but it will make it more secure than the neighbors. And that becomes a reasonable way of going about things. Anyway, but I bring that up because yes, those kinds of bot abuse things are definitely things we should be thinking about, especially if your system has a marginal cost to it, right? Where you're gating to services that will cost you money as your customers use them.
Yes, and this is why I want to have them authenticated so the bot gets the invoice. I mean, whoever is running the bot, because they have to have a login. But that is super cool. So I think now when people listen to this, they have an idea of how to get started,
Mhm.
how to get the basic security going, how to, have some considerations and, maybe think about twice if they want to use Zapier for that, because Xano gives them a way cheaper solution long term and a way more secure solution. Now, we know you're the Xano expert. And you have your wonderful YouTube channel, which helps me so much with my backend stuff. Is there anything that we don't know yet? It's like, is there any Ray state change secret out there for Xano that you kept secret and now it's the time to tell it?
The the big secret about Xano is that there's not a big secret about Xano. I sometimes I think get more credit than I should for being an expert in Xano, but it's because what Xano really does well is make it easy to think like the machine, right? And so you'll find that as you get good with Xano, have some experience with Xano, you actually get a little bit more sympathy and a little more understanding of how some other code things work. And that becomes kind of useful as well. I sort of think about no code versus low code. Like in no code is like, hey, I've got, it's trying to elevate the machine and think the way you do, right? That's kind of like what Bubble does, right? It creates its own little mental model for Bubble. And then with the theory of being that mental model is going to be easier for you to deal with than like thinking like the machine, as opposed to Xana, which is trying to make it easier for you to understand how the actual control flows work, how the actual bits work inside. But the the way I use Xano that I found to be most helpful is that a lot of people look at it and say, they compare it with like Supabase, right? Or they'll compare it with like Zapier. And I actually think comparing it with Zapier is more interesting than comparing it with Supabase because Xano is, of course, providing a database, but the database is kind of pedestrian. It's as good. I mean, Supabase provides a bare database, but Xano's is good enough for most circumstances, right? It's table stakes. Where Xano is really good is in the function stack. And that and using Xano's function stack to be routing decisions among external services. Again, this is why I think of it like being a little bit like Zapier that way, is where its power really comes out. And so when you're dealing with like, third-party AI systems or third-party data systems or whatever it is, being able to just make those connections, I find it's a combination of using the internal control flow, right? Making API requests and a little bit of database, along the way. And those are the services that create the most remarkable value taking advantage of Xano. So when I think of Xano, I think a lot of people look at Xano and say it's going to be a backend, and the backend is primarily a database, and the database has a little bit of functionality and control sitting on top of it. I think of it as the reverse. Xano is its most powerful when it's being used for the function stack as a first class consideration. If all you need is a database, go to Supabase. But if you're looking for control, if you're looking for flow, if you're looking for being able to make the machine do extraordinary things or manipulate that data, that's going to be where it really sings. And that approach to it, I have found, is the thing that really allows me to unlock a lot more data about it. When I see people using Xano for the first time, they often make function stacks that have like one line to them, right? Like, hey, this is going to be, I'm going to make a request to a database,
Not
and
my
then I'm
function
going to check
stack.
results. Fair enough. I see this all the time. And then like the questions that come up in like the Xano community are, how do I get my query all records or whatever to do all this fancy stuff? And often the answer is just get the query all records or whatever to get all the data you need, and then use the function stack, use like another dozen lines in there to loop over that data and either augment it or massage it or what have you to turn that square peg into a round peg so it can go into your round hole that you have later on. That's where the power is. Doing that same thing in, say, a Supabase is a bit more challenging, requires more code, right? If the shape isn't right in the database, it's more work to get it from here to there. Xano does that super, super well. So when you have that kind of transformation task coming along, and that's one of the reasons why, as a data scientist, I really like it, because I think in terms of the data and like how to manipulate, get the shapes that I want, get the features I want, that's where I find it really sings. And so if people are asking like how I think about Xano, that's the way I think about it, and that's why I get a lot more value out of it.
I also think Xano is where your business logic should live in, because think of it like this. You build now your web application in WeWeb, and you do as much as you can in WeWeb's JavaScript and all of that. Now, if you want to move from WeWeb to Wized, or from Wized to WeWeb, or from Wized to Next.js, you have to rebuild all of that, right? But if the main logic lives on Xano and you're just facilitating HTTP requests, you just need to move the HTTP request from here to there, finish up your UI, and you're good to go. You don't have to rebuild your business logic. So I see a lot of people, they do JavaScript snippets like this, long ones, to process the data before it gets sent to Xano. And then, they have to Xano added in there. But the beauty is, send that raw data to Xano, build the function stack in Xano to process that raw data accordingly. And then this makes you free to move away from Wiz to Node.js, or to move to Wiz from WeWeb, or to go to Toddle if you're feeling fancy. But it puts you in a position where your backend is now your central point of truth. And then when you need to build a mobile app, it all gets super easy, because then, your data still goes there, and you just have to fit this endpoint, which I consider of like modules. You move that module to there, and you don't have to worry about rebuilding too much, which I think is pretty cool. And this is where you help me think about like that, because I used to be, let's ask ChatGPT, get code like this, put it in Wist, and send it to Xano.
Well, I think we're going to see more AI assisted coding coming down the pike, particularly in the course of the next 12 months. I think that there's going to be a lot of growth in there. But the point you just made of like where is the source of truth, but more than that, where is the source of thinking about your business? I find that front ends aren't really good at thinking because you're going to have you have your view, your representation of what you're going to have of what the person's going to see. You have interactivity, being able to respond to their requests. And then if you also add and now I need to think about what all that means to the front end, that makes the front end much fatter. We call that a fat front end. And that can be important if you're going to be offline first, right? And there are
Yes.
situations you require that. But in most situations you don't. It makes a lot of sense to say you want to have a thinner front end, focus on just being really great at that interactivity and that view, and then retrieve your data from this backend that can be controlled by the company. And then that way it's only access, like the ideas of it, the way your stuff works, is all your company's intellectual property. And provides you with both flexibility in terms of having multiple front ends, but also the back end is really good at doing that kind of logic. So the front end is really good at view. It's really good at interactivity. These are things that like all these front end tools make super easy to do, right? But what the back end makes really easy is logic. And so,
Yes.
like doing the logic where it's just easier is also going to be the place where it's more controlled for the company, and I think makes a lot of sense. And then you're going to have certain situations which you need to replicate some of that logic to the front end to be able to be more front end first or things for performance or what have you. But if you start by saying that you use a good term, central source of truth as being in your back end, you're in really good shape. And Xano lets you express that with a no code function stack, and I encourage people to use it. And then if your comfort is more with using some code, that's fantastic too. There's like FastGen, there is Supabase edge functions also allow you to be able to describe things that way. Firebase basically works that way with Firebase Cloud Functions. And then there's sort of interesting, sort of more AI enabled ways in between. That's like what BuildShip does. But what they all have in common is it's the back end with the logic, and the front end is responsible for view and interactivity.
And then also, I think this is what I started doing that when I was still working with Embed One.
Yeah.
I didn't like people used the Wized JavaScript API to, kind of like hack things around. But
Yeah.
thanks to you, I learned the power of Xano. And I was like, why do I even have to work with their API? I'm just going to put that code from my chart.js in a variable
Yep.
in Xano. I'll add wherever I need to add the array of the data. I'll add a
Yeah.
tokenized text. I'll do like brackets, you know, tags, and then I have brackets count or numbers, and then I just get that data from Xano, retrieve it, send back that HTML file, and then I just have like a div block, and then I use set text HTML in Wized to take the response and set the text in there. And I got chart.js working without writing any code, no API, nothing. And it all works on the back end. So you can build things, I would say, way faster and way more scalable, because then you can send that to a mobile app, you can send that to a native app, and you're not so tangled in of the mechanisms that your front end provider will use, because at some point you will outgrow your front end provider, especially if you're a SaaS and you need scalability and you need power and the pace at whatever your tool is going. So let it be Toddle, WeWeb, or Wiz, is not at the pace where your creative mind wants to go.
That sounds right to me. I mean, State Change itself runs on half a dozen front ends that are strewn about. And its central source of truth right now is running on a Xano instance, not even a super high-end one. Although I compose in other services because Xano's use as a data router is where it's really excellent. And then like, other more complicated calculation or, generation services, what have you, just use third-party services and let them do their job where they do them best. I find there's sort of two spirits of no code, right? One is the all-in-one approach, right? That's kind of like where Bubble lives. And the other is the a la carte, right? You're trying to get the
Oh, you
world
just
class.
made some hearts.
And here, yeah. And those but that a la carte approach is where Xano does really well. And the way you get advantage of is what you were just saying, right? Which is, hey, I was on this front end, and this other front end is doing a better job for me. I was using this service provider. This service provider does a better job for me, and you can switch them all out because you're taking a mental model of this being a composed set of stuff that's all working for you, as opposed to you're just trying to figure out, how do I do this in Bubble?
Yes, and then you can also do like, we only serve the HTML file that is our video player after you're authenticated. And this will then put you in a position where you don't have that member stack issue where, essentially you just disable JavaScript and you can view all your content. With Xano, you just serve the content as an HTML file only when the user is authenticated. And you can, just build that component in Webflow, export the HTML file at, where you would have the link at like tokenized text, have Xano add that in there, and then serve that HTML file when the user is authenticated. And now we're going back to authentication and security. And you can do cool stuff with it. I think people only look at Xano, oh, that's my database. You can do so much exciting stuff like serving HTML files that get like rendered. You can build super exciting stuff. And quite frankly, the thing that I built that builds mobile applications is fully built on Xano.
You can do a lot of really cool stuff. And if someone's, watching this and they're thinking like, hey, what should I be doing in Xano that I wasn't doing before? I would recommend my 3 favorite words in Xano are start from scratch. Like when you're doing an API call, do the start from scratch to make it a more clean canvas of like what it is you want to accomplish. Because there's some basic things you can do, and like Xano allows you to do them really fast, right? But that's always definitionally going to be table stakes. What's going to be remarkable about your application? That remarkable part is going to be what's different from everybody else's. And so if you give yourself permission to start from scratch and to say that you're going to do something that's going to be, weird, that's going to be how you have the unlock. It's not like I'm building a SaaS, you're building your SaaS. SaaS for your customers are based on your expertise in the market and provide a really different kind of service. That's going to be that whichever thing you're doing that's from start from scratch, that's probably where your application or project has its beginning of creating really extraordinary different value in the market from everybody else.
And also one cool thing I heard Andreas from Toddle say, he said,
Yeah.
build more useless stuff, build some cool shit on the side that doesn't have any real use application just to do something that you never did before to get a different view at that. And I think this is also a very valuable thing that you can apply with Xano. I mean, I don't use Framer, but I built like a tool in Xano that will scrape a Framer website, convert it into pure HTML, and then let me export this into my Webflow site. So I can have design in Framer because I'm not a designer, so I like Framer. Because it has this pre-built components and their templates look pretty nice. And then I just copy that, build a template in Framer, get the code, paste it in Webflow, and I have that whole thing now built in Webflow with CSS animations and everything. And I built that like in an hour in Xano. I will probably not use this because I don't even know how to use Framer, but I learned so much about working with HTML and manipulating that. And I could even serve this. I could even have like just my domain rerouted to the Xano server and, have my website hosted on there. This is super powerful stuff you can build in Xano. And it's not just backend. You can build the next big thing in Xano. And, if you think there is a limitation, you're just thinking that there is a limitation because you can build everything in Xano. It's an exciting tool.
You can definitely build a lot, and I often tell people don't worry too much about like what the future is going to bring. If you can build yourself like a super successful business, and you get to the point where like the Xano instance is no longer able to work for you, I mean, congratulations, you now have lots of money to fund whatever it is you're going to be doing next. But it gets you really far. The other thing I find about no code in general that I really like about no code is how it encourages people who don't necessarily have that much of a development background to start experimenting and discovering capabilities that they didn't quite know that they had, right? They look and say, hey, there should be an app for that. There is an opportunity here. I can do this. And I'm not going to say that's easy or that's not work because it can't, there's a little bit that's hard and there's a whole lot of it that's work. But oh my goodness, the way we can just sort of unlock people's potential, not because it's going to take you 5 minutes, like Zapier, yeah, sure, 5 minutes, zero to hero. But that idea that you have that you can take your expertise and turn it into a product or turn it into something that can be really remarkable. There's just a lot of that out there, and the evolving state of the tooling, and Xano is definitely part of that. just creates these opportunities that people can be a lot more than what they were before. And that's what I find really exciting in a, future of humanity way in terms of using this tech. Like, go build useless stuff, build stuff that is interesting and meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be meaningful to anyone else, but it's going to make you more than what you were. You're going to understand the business issues better. You're going to be able to think more clearly, logically, and you're going to have tools that will allow you to be a more effective profession.
I think this is a wonderful end word. Like no code empowers you to be creative and to express your creativity and to express that vision that you have all the time in you, finally into something that you can get out there. And you would be surprised how many people share that interest for this completely niche down thing.
Yeah, man. Well put. Well put.
So yeah, it was super great talking to you. Do you have anything that, like I think after this, people are very interested in what you do. Where can people find you? What's your YouTube channel? How can people join State Change? And what is even State Change?
Right. I mean, so State Change is a community of people who are, interested in, solving problems, using and building the products that have meaning for them. A lot of it is about using no code, low code. And we focus on, like, what are the hard problems that are sticking them. And if people want to learn more about that and want to be joining us, I would encourage them to come over to statechange.ai and check us out. I also have a YouTube channel, sort of our free content for people who want to learn more about, like, interesting challenges as it relates to Xano or WeWeb or Wized, or, I do quite a bit of work on various AI tools as well. And they can find that on, YouTube / at State Change. And I'm sure you'll put this all in the links to
Yes,
the
I'll
to
put that
the
on the
video.
links.
And if you find this stuff of interest, please, come check us out. And even if you don't find it to be something you want to join today, please reach out. Like, leave a comment on the video. Let us know what you're thinking, and how we can be doing better by you.
And also one thing I want to point out, Ray is a complete expert. When I joined State Change, and I'm a member too, so this is not advertising here. I'm just completely amazed by Ray, and he saved my butt too much times, like too many times that I should admit on this YouTube channel. But uh, sometimes I just go to him and say, Ray, I want to do this video. How do I do that? And he just sort of like figures that out for me, and then you get the video and you think it was all me, but most of the times it was Ray. So now the secret is out. But thank you so much, Ray, for helping me with that and to making cool videos. But it's completely worth being in there. And I think it's $150 or something if you want to be in the office hours, and 29 or something if you just want to be in the forum. I know for some people it's a lot of money that watch this YouTube channel, but it's really an investment. And if you work on projects for clients or for yourself, the way you can get this product out there faster will be amazing, because you're not just having like advice where somebody says, try this, and it doesn't work. There is really someone who cares about you and who cares about what you're doing and is holding your hand throughout the way and making sure that you get it done. And this is why I appreciate Ray. And yeah, this is why we made this video together.
Man, I really appreciate that, and I think, I speak for the people who are watching, that we're all really grateful for the videos that you're putting out there too, because you're making a lot of people a lot smarter and helping them go faster.
Thank you so much. And also, Ray is not cheap, so State Change is a real steal. Um, so yeah, it
Um,
was great talking to you. Anything else that you want to say?
no, I think we're good. Thank you so much for having me today. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for being here. And to all the viewers, if you have anybody you would like me to interview, let me know, because I think we can always learn more from having different views, different opinions about how to approach development, because it gets boring if you only listen to me. So, I want to bring some fresh insights in here as well. So if you have something, an interesting thing that you want to showcase or, help others with, please feel free to reach out. Yeah, and, I'm excited to share more interesting people that, help us in our daily development life.
Superman.
Thank you so much for being here. And all of you, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to check out Ray's YouTube channel and State Change. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.